Welcome to this special episode of the Informing Choices Minipod, produced in collaboration with One Day in 2050. Ecofascism, Leviathan or Lifejacket of Humankind is a multi-author book featuring 36 top futurist voices who have come together to explore our climate future beyond purely climate data through the lens of ecofascism. But what is ecofascism? Ecofascism is a political ideology that merges elements of environmentalism with authoritarianism or fascism. It often involves a belief that environmental problems are caused by overpopulation, immigration, industrialization, and that these issues can be addressed through restrictive policies and even violence against marginalized groups. The premise for all the stories in the book is this. The year is 2050. Temperatures have risen by over 2 degrees Celsius. Global population has reached 9.8 billion. Pressure on natural systems is at its peak. A new global movement has arisen. A totalitarian system has been enforced based on the minimum climate footprint on every aspect of our society. In today's episode of the podcast, we welcome futurist and UNESCO Chair in Futures Studies, Sohail Inayatullah, to talk about his chapter in the book. Sohail, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks so much, Steve. Great to be here.
So your chapter then about a Gaia-based government taking over the planet and imposing fascist control. The environment improves, but questions remain. Talk us briefly through your chapter. What is the story you're trying to tell here?
I think the way I want to shift it in terms of the ecological imperatives call us to move from strict ego individualism to collectivism.
Hmm.
And I could see very much those in the West would find it difficult, but I see no issues. Those in Asia, Africa, indigenous communities, costs are too high to continue the way we are. If this means some restrictions, then so be it, whether it's in terms of mobility or food. So I want to move from eco-fascism to actually, this starts us in the process of eco-liberation.
That's fascinating. Are those cultural differences you alluded to there? Do you think they will genuinely be a barrier to some countries in the West really adopting what's required to get a handle on the climate crisis?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at parties, political parties that are far more individualistic, the
Hmm.
costs are very high. And I think so the cost of individual liberty is going, then moves to a situation we won't make the transition to a global green sustainable planet.
Yeah.
Now, my own sense is I think the head of the president of European Parliament 10 years ago said, we know what the right thing to do is morally with climate change. We don't believe we can get reelected on it.
Uh,
So this is the same issue we're seeing with Putin's war, Israel's genocide. We know the 5 Security Council members can stop violence very quickly,
hmm.
but they want to hold on to individual national power as opposed to saying, well, the rights of humans, the rights of nature, the rights of weak, and finding transformative ways to resolve conflicts where everyone wins is a priority. But their view is no, their own power base is a priority. And
Yeah.
so when confronted with ecological disaster, with loss of well-being of future generations, why would they shift unless they're imperiled as well? So that's the only argument I can see forward is they have to feel the pain
Yeah.
others are feeling. Then they might say what worked after World War II won't work in terms of the Earth challenges. So I know our work with Interpol has been the same thing. Every argument, every time we have Interpol meeting or the futures part, I always suggest Interpol is between nations, and as every futurist makes the argument, right? Our problems are planetary. No international system can resolve it. It's the planetary global Gaia governance is the next stage in human evolution. If we can do it without losing individual rights, even better. But I currently, certainly for the transitions, I have to eat differently. I have to consume less. And so they're saying if each one of us makes a little bit of a change, we all gain. So that was the purpose of that chapter.
One of the things I always find interesting when I'm talking to all of the authors that I've spoken to about the book is the connectivity between the core kind of climate change element, but then the other social, economic, political kind of context. It all needs to come together, and these stories are crucial for making those connections or surfacing those connections, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, when I'm with accounting type groups, I said, well, we can talk about worldview shift, but I know you folks are only interested in how we count what we count.
Yeah,
And I said, well, you're counting in GDP. What would it look like if we did that quadruple P, prosperity, planet, people, purpose?
yeah,
And so this is kind of where we want to take the book. And I thought that's where, so now on the other side, the case I've made is that there's new techs coming in, AI,
mm,
the Internet of Food. Those are quite dramatic, and no one can argue against how dramatic they are. They can be levers for transformation, or they can continue the algorithms of oppression. So I was hoping to try to shift the argument in that way. And I think just as you're saying, we're very clear. It's not just single bottom line, it's multiple measurements and
yeah,
multiple stories that are trying to push the debate. I go back to Markley's work from the 60s. Oliver Markley, we said the image of the future leads. And Wallerstein talked about the revolutions of the late 60s, the social movements, the green movements. They've led the way. That doesn't mean there's terrible war going on and there's always a backlash. So right now we're in the face of the backlash, but I can't see a way out without some type of willingness
yeah,
to give up something for the greater good. If I know when communities, nations come to us, let's do futures, they often want a magic mushroom.
yeah.
You know, is that futures method going to resolve everything for our
Yeah.
national prosperity? I said, unlearning and learning and focusing on that is your magic mushroom.
Yeah.
If you want an X method, an X forecast that's going to give you what you want, then there's many psychics and forecasters you can go to who do a much better job than us.
Yeah, that's right.
But
That's
we're
right.
not good at being psychic or good forecasters. We
Yeah.
can work with you. So that becomes the kind of the leverage point.
I love that phrase as well, image of the future. That feels really powerful. I was going to ask, what was your motivation behind the chapter, but I think you've already really answered that very, very nicely. But I guess the thing that is also interesting me is what do you want readers to do, to consider, to think about after reading your chapter?
So first is this transition ecofascism to eco-liberation.
Hmm.
Second is to get, I know when I started working with different green groups in the 80s and 90s, they're all very clear. Here's the world we don't want.
Yeah.
And kind of, you know, as futurists, Futures 101 is yes, true. Can you visualize, imagine, draw, write the world you want? What does it look like for a citizen, for a leader? So that's kind of what I want to get clarity on the preferred future. And that's, I think, one of our big roles as futurists. Once we've done that, then of course the next question is, okay, 2050, we have a greener Gaian world, a global government. And I think that's going to happen in some shape or the other. How did we get there? And that transition, of course, is the tough one for every decision maker, because no one wants to give up their piece of pie unless we can convince them, if you do this well, there's going to be more pie for everyone.
Yeah.
That's like, so that's what I want them to move towards. So I mean, you know, the places we work with, countries we live in and work with, some are very innovative, Australia, Hawaii, and some, for every solution, there's a problem.
Mm.
So I don't want to fight against it, but I want to say, well, what would it look like in your life if for every problem there was a new solution? So that's that shift I'd like to see individually and collectively. So these challenges are planetary, they're horrifying, they're difficult. And I think Toynbee, the great British historian, said there's always a bottleneck in human evolution, that bottleneck is resolved through individuals imagining different future, responding creatively to the challenge. So that's my takeaway for this book.
Uh, Sohail, that was absolutely brilliant. I really love the way that you've kind of weaved those political and social issues in, and very clearly stated what's blindingly obvious. Unless we work together, this thing's going to be damned difficult to resolve. Sohail, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure, Steve. Great to virtually meeting you, and I hope we can meet face to face sometime now that I'm in your
Yeah,
backyard.
that'd be great. That'd be great. So, Hal, thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss the other episodes of this series of podcasts on ecofascism and all our other episodes on the Informing Choices mini pod. And do let your friends and colleagues know all about the podcast.